The Arizona sun bleached the sky to bone white by mid-morning. Heat rose in shimmering curtains from earth that had cracked into 1,000 jagged pieces, each fissure filled with dust fine as powdered bone. July 1883. The temperature climbed past 112 degrees and kept climbing, the kind of heat that made men's thoughts turn strange and slow, that made the horizon dance with phantom lakes that vanished as you approached. 12 wagons crawled through the narrow valley like dying animals seeking water they would never find. Dust rose behind them in a column visible for miles, a signal to anyone watching that easy prey moved through the territory. Inside the third wagon, Michael Morrison gripped leather reins slick with his own sweat, a Winchester Model 1873 resting across his knees. He had loaded it that morning with 44 caliber rounds, each one capable of dropping a man at 200 yards. He had counted the ammunition 3 times, a ritual that brought no comfort but was necessary anyway. Beside him sat his wife Catherine, though everyone called her Kate. 28 years old, 7 months pregnant, the swell of her belly pressing against a dress that had been blue once but had faded to something closer to gray. Sweat plastered the fabric to her spine. In her arms, she cradled their daughter Emma, 5 years old, blonde curls limp against a forehead flushed with heat. Behind them, in a woven basket lined with blankets, baby Daniel slept the fitful sleep of an infant, too hot to rest properly, his 4-month-old face red and damp. Michael had promised Kate a new life in California. Rich soil, he had said, opportunities, a future for their children. Now, as he watched vultures circle overhead, he wondered if they would survive the next hour. The attack came from the rocks above without warning. One moment, the valley held only the creak of wagon wheels and the plodding rhythm of exhausted horses. The next moment, gunfire erupted from positions so well concealed the raiders might have been ghosts. 15 Apache Renegades men, who had abandoned their tribes to become something worse, descended on the wagon train with the efficiency of wolves who had done this before. Michael raised his Winchester and fired. The first shot struck a raider in the shoulder, spinning him backwards off his horse. The second found its mark in another man's chest, dropping him instantly. But there were too many, far too many, and they moved with coordinated precision that spoke of planning and experience. Captain Thomas Morrison leading the wagon train, and no relation to Michael despite the shared name shouted above the chaos. "Leave everything. Run for your lives." Michael turned to Kate, his eyes meeting hers in a moment stretched thin by understanding. "Head east. Find Fort Yuma." "Don't stop for anything," Kate's voice broke. "Come with us, please, Michael." He reached out and touched Emma's cheek, then placed his hand on Kate's swollen belly where his third child grew. "They need their mother more than their father. Now go." Michael Morrison stood his ground as his wife drove the wagon forward, whipping the horses into a gallop they could not sustain. He fired methodically, each shot calculated to buy seconds to create space between his family and the raiders closing in. He dropped 3 more men before an arrow punched through his shoulder, the impact spinning him half around. He staggered but kept shooting, kept standing, kept buying time with his body. Then a rifle shot from behind caught him in the back. Michael fell. Kate screamed his name, but the wagon was already too far away, pulled by horses running on instinct and terror toward the eastern horizon where no help waited. When the dust settled and the screams faded into terrible silence, broken only by the crackle of burning wood and the cries of the dying, Kate brought the wagon to a shuddering halt. Her hands shook so violently she could barely hold the reins. Emma was crying in great gasping sobs. Baby Daniel wailed with a sound that scraped at something primal in Kate's chest. Behind them, 11 wagons burned. Black smoke rose in columns that stained the cloudless sky. She should have kept running. Every survival instinct screamed at her to flee, to put miles between herself and whatever horrors lay behind. But then she heard it, a sound that cut through her grief and terror like a blade. Children crying. Kate climbed down from the wagon, her pregnant belly making every movement awkward and painful. She walked back toward the wreckage, each step heavy with dread, and something else, something she could not name but felt in her bones. Beneath an overturned wagon, 3 small figures huddled together. A girl, maybe 8 years old, with blonde hair matted with blood that was not her own. Her name was Sophie Reynolds. Her parents lay 20 feet away, their bodies already drawing the attention of circling vultures. The girl's eyes were dry, too shocked for tears, staring at nothing with a blank intensity that frightened Kate more than screaming would have. A boy 6 years old sitting motionless with his hands clenched into fists. Lucas Hayes, His father had tried to shield him with his own body. It had not been enough. The boy had watched his father die. His mother had died trying to reach them. Now he sat in the dirt and stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. A tiny girl, barely 3 years old, trembling so violently her teeth chattered, despite the heat. Iris Patterson. She clutched a torn piece of her mother's dress, whispering "Mama" over and over like an incantation that might bring the dead back to life. Kate looked at the three orphans, then at her own two children, waiting in the wagon, then at the supplies remaining in her vehicle. 2 days of food, maybe three, if they rationed carefully. 2 quarts of water in a desert where an adult needed a full gallon per day just to survive. One lame horse already showing signs of exhaustion, favoring its left front leg. The mathematics of survival were cruel and unambiguous. Taking these children meant everyone might die. Leaving them meant they would certainly die. Kate Morrison had spent her entire life being practical, making reasonable decisions based on sound judgment. But as she looked into Sophie's blank eyes, saw the way Lucas's hands trembled, heard Iris's broken whimpering, for a mother who would never answer something inside her, made a choice that had nothing to do with reason. "Get in the wagon, all of you." That was 4 days ago. Now Kate trudged forward through sand that grabbed at her feet with every step barefoot because her shoes had disintegrated on the second day. The rope harness she had fashioned cut into her shoulders with a pain that had moved beyond sharp into something dull and constant. Behind her, the wagon creaked and groaned, one wheel wobbling dangerously on an axle that might give out at any moment. The horse had collapsed that morning. Its legs had simply buckled foam at its mouth, eyes rolling back to show the whites. Kate had knelt beside the dying animal and wept not for the horse, though she felt its loss, but for what its death meant. She had tied the rope around her own waist and begun pulling. 7 months pregnant, pulling a wagon loaded with 5 children through the Arizona desert. Each step sent lightning bolts of pain up her swollen legs. Her vision blurred at the edges. Her lips had split open, crusted with dried blood. When she touched her tongue to them all, she tasted was copper and salt and the promise of death. Behind her in the wagon, the children suffered in their own ways. Emma tried to be brave because she was oldest, but at night the 5-year-old whispered questions that had no good answers. "Mama, when is Papa coming back? Mama, why does my tummy hurt so much? Mama, are we going to die like Papa?" Kate had no answers. She could only pull the rope harder. Baby Daniel had stopped crying on the 3rd day, not because he was content, but because he had no energy left. Kate's milk had dried up her body, unable to produce what it needed for survival. The infant's lips were cracked, his breathing shallow. Each time Kate looked at him, terror seized her heart. 4 months old. He was 4 months old and dying because she had made a choice to save 3 children who were not hers. Sophie, the 8-year-old orphan, had tried to help pull the wagon. The girl weighed maybe 60 pounds, and her thin arms could barely grip the rope, but she tried. Her palms bled from the friction. She wrapped them in strips torn from her dress and tried again. Kate had ordered her back into the wagon, but Sophie's eyes had held something defiant, something that said she understood the mathematics of survival and refused to be cargo. Lucas had not spoken a single word since the attack. He spent his time collecting small stones from the desert floor, arranging them in careful patterns. Kate realized with a chill that he was building tiny graves, one for each person he had lost. 7 stones arranged in a row. 7 lives ended. The boy was trying to make sense of death through ritual, and Kate had no idea how to reach him through that wall of silence. Iris, at 3 years old, had developed a fever. Heat exhaustion, probably, or worse. The child's skin burned to the touch. Kate had used the last of their water that morning, dampening a cloth to press against Iris's forehead. Now there was nothing left. No water, no food except for 2 hardtack biscuits that would barely sustain one person for a day. No hope except the distant possibility of Fort Yuma, still more than 80 miles away. Kate did not think they would make it another mile. The sun had climbed toward its apex when she saw the stones. A circle of them, half buried in sand, marking what might have been a well. Might have been. In the desert, mirages were more common than water, and hope was the cruelest illusion of all. But this was real. Kate stumbled toward it, dropping the rope from her shoulders. She crawled the last few feet on hands and knees, her pregnant belly scraping the ground. The children stayed in the wagon, too weak to move, watching with hollow eyes that expected nothing. She peered over the edge of the well. No bucket, No pulley, just a few inches of muddy water at the bottom 20 feet down. Kate lay flat on the stones, reaching down as far as her arm would extend. Her fingers brushed the surface. She cupped her hand and managed to scoop perhaps a tablespoon of the brown liquid. It was warm and gritty, tasting of minerals and decay. But it was water. She brought it to her lips, then stopped. Looked back at the wagon. At baby Daniel dying of dehydration. At Iris burning with fever. Kate poured the water into a small cup and carried it to the baby. Drop by drop, she let it fall into his mouth. His tongue moved weakly. Some of it ran down his chin, wasted precious drops absorbed by the sand. But he swallowed some. She went back to the well, reached down again. This time managed 2 tablespoons. She gave it to Iris. On her third attempt, Kate's vision blurred completely. The world tilted sideways. She swayed her head, dipping dangerously close to the stone edge. She was going to fall in. She was going to die in this well, and the children would die in the wagon, and in a few days there would be nothing left but bleached bones in the endless, indifferent desert. Then a hand closed around her shoulder and pulled her back. Kate gasped, clutching baby Daniel to her chest as she twisted around. A man sat astride a dark chestnut horse no more than 20 feet away. He was motionless, framed by the harsh backlight of the sun. The first thing she noticed was his left sleeve pinned neatly just above the elbow. No arm below it, just empty fabric folded and secured. No weapons were drawn, no threat showed in his posture. Just a weathered shirt, boots, scuffed from miles of travel, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Kate pulled Daniel tighter against her body. "Stay back. I don't have anything left to steal." The man did not move. Slowly, deliberately, he unslung a leather satchel from his saddle horn. He reached in with his right hand and pulled out a full canteen and a cloth-wrapped bundle. He set them gently on the ground between them, then backed his horse up 2 steps. Not a word. Kate blinked, confused by the absence of threat. In her experience, men who approached lone women in the desert wanted something, usually something terrible. "Who are you?" The man's voice, when it came, was low and rough, like gravel grinding beneath wagon wheels. "Name's Ethan Cole, just passing through." He looked past her to the wagon, to the 5 children who stared back with sunburned faces and eyes that had seen too much. His expression did not change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. "You alone," Kate nodded, unable to form words around the constriction in her throat. "Since Fort Yuma." She did not offer more. He did not press. But her body, pushed beyond all reasonable limits, finally surrendered. Her knees buckled. She tried to rise and staggered instead. Her vision went white at the edges. She felt herself falling. Ethan Cole moved with surprising speed for a man missing an arm. He dismounted in one smooth motion and caught Kate before she hit the ground, supporting her weight with his right arm, while his left, the one that ended in a stump, pressed against his side for balance. "Easy now, I've got you." Up close, Kate could see the details. He was perhaps 42, maybe older. Dark brown hair shot through with silver. A scar ran from his ear to his jawline on the left side, white against weathered skin. His eyes were gray, but not cold. Tired, she thought. Eyes that had seen too much and found no peace in any of it. Ethan helped her sit, then moved to his horse. He retrieved the canteen and bundle he had set down. The canteen he opened and handed to Kate. "Small sips. Not too fast, or you'll be sick." She drank. The water was cool, almost sweet compared to the brackish liquid she had scraped from the well. It took every ounce of willpower not to drain the entire container. Ethan watched her for a moment, then walked to the wagon. He examined the broken wheel, the frayed rope harness, the exhausted children. His face revealed nothing, but Kate saw his jaw tighten when he looked at baby Daniel's cracked lips, at Iris's flushed face. From the wagon, Sophie spoke. The 8-year-old's voice was sharp with suspicion. "Why are you helping us? What do you want?" Ethan turned to look at the girl. For just a moment, his carefully controlled expression cracked. Pain flooded his features, not physical pain, but something deeper, something that lived in the marrow of his bones. "You remind me of someone. Someone I couldn't save." Before Sophie could respond, Ethan began working. He removed his saddle with practiced efficiency, using his single hand and occasionally his teeth to grip straps while he buckled them. From his pack, he pulled a length of sturdy rope and began fashioning it into a harness. Kate watched, still dazed. "What are you doing?" Ethan did not look at her. "You want to keep moving or die here? I don't even know you." How do I know you're not? He turned then, and the look in his eyes silenced her. Lady, if I wanted to hurt you, I would have done it already. But if you'd rather drag that wagon yourself until you collapse and those kids starve, be my guest. It was not kindness in his voice, just flat, brutal honesty. Kate's body swayed. She tried to stand again, but her legs would not support her. She fell to her knees in the dust, one hand pressed to her swollen belly, where she felt the baby kick weakly. Her third child, the one she might never live to meet. Emma suddenly broke away from the wagon and ran to Ethan. The 5-year-old threw her arms around his leg, clinging with desperate strength. Please, mister, please help my mama. She's trying so hard, but she's going to die. Ethan went rigid. He looked down at the small, blonde girl, hugging his leg, and something in his face shattered. For just a heartbeat, he was somewhere else some other time. A different little girl with blonde hair. A bedroom filled with the smell of sickness and the sound of labored breathing. A weak voice saying his name. Then the memory released him, and he was back in the desert, in the Pershvaneman, with this child who was not his sister, but who needed him just as desperately. Ethan knelt down, his right hand resting gently on Emma's head. I'll help, but your mama needs to trust me. Emma looked up at him with complete faith. I trust you. Kate watched this exchange through a haze of exhaustion and pain. She looked at her daughter, then at Ethan Cole, the stranger with one arm and haunted eyes who had appeared from nowhere offering salvation. Every rational part of her mind screamed warnings. He could be anyone. A criminal, a deserter, a man with motives she could not fathom. But the desperate dying part of her that loved these 5 children more than her own life whispered something different. He's your only chance. Kate nodded slowly. All right, Ethan stood. He finished securing the rope to his horse's harness, then attached it to the wagon. But instead of mounting the horse, he simply took the lead rope in his hand and began walking. Not riding, walking at the same slow, steady pace that Kate and the children could manage. Come on, then. Daylight's burning. They walked for 2 miles before anyone spoke again. Sophie had been watching Ethan with narrowed eyes the entire time, her arms crossed over her thin chest. She leaned close to Lucas and whispered just loud enough for Kate to hear. Do you think he's a good man or a bad man? Pretending Lucas, who had been silent for so long, turned to look at his companion. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, rusty from disuse. I think he's a sad man, trying not to be bad. Ethan gave no sign that he had heard, but his shoulders tensed slightly and his pace never wavered. They traveled until sunset painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Ethan led them to a high plateau tucked between 2 cliff faces. A thin stream trickled nearby, fed by some underground spring. Scattered brush provided minimal shade. We camp here. Wind's light. Water's close. Defensible position if we need it. He set to work immediately, not waiting for permission or assistance. Using salvaged branches and a roll of old canvas from his pack, he began constructing a shelter. Working with one arm, his movements were economical and practiced. He braced poles with his feet, held rope in his teeth, while his hand-tied knots used his body weight to drive stakes into the hard ground. Kate tried to help, but her pregnant belly made every movement awkward and painful. Rest. It was not a suggestion. You're no good to them if you collapse. While he worked, Kate gathered the children close. They huddled together in the shade of the wagon, watching the strange man build them a home from scraps and determination. Is he going to keep us? Iris whispered, her fevered cheek resting against Kate's arm. I don't know, sweetheart. I hope so, Emma said. He has kind eyes. Sophie snorted. Kind eyes don't mean a kind heart. But even Sophie could not look away as Ethan continued his work. By the time the sun touched the horizon, he had erected a sturdy shelter with a sloped roof, windbreak walls, and a carefully constructed fire pit lined with stones. Then he picked up a small pack and disappeared into the desert without explanation. Kate's heart seized with sudden panic. Had he abandoned them already? Had this all been some cruel prelude to leaving them to die? But 20 minutes later, Ethan returned carrying 2 jackrabbits and 3 prairie dogs, all freshly killed. He sat down by the fire pit, pulled out a large Bowie knife with a 10-inch blade, and began cleaning the animals with swift, efficient movements. Slit the skin from throat to belly, peel it back, remove the organs while keeping the liver and kidneys, cut the meat into portions. All of it done one-handed, the blade dancing in his grip with the sureness of long practice. The children watched, mesmerized by the efficiency of violence turned to survival. When Ethan had the meat prepared, he placed it on flat stones heated by the fire. The smell of cooking rabbit filled the air, and Kate's stomach clenched with hunger so intense it hurt. Ethan divided the meat into 6 equal portions, 5 for the children and Kate, one notably smaller for himself. Eat slow, your bellies aren't used to food. Too fast and you'll be sick. They ate. For the first time in 4 days, they ate real food. The meat was plain unseasoned except by smoke, but it tasted like salvation. Iris, tiny 3-year-old Iris, crawled over to Ethan with her portion still uneaten. She held it out to him with trembling hands. You eat more. You big. Iris, little. Ethan shook his head. I'm fine, little one. You need it more. Iris tilted her head, studying him with those fever-bright eyes that saw more than they should. Then she asked the question that changed everything. Mr. Ethan, if my mama is still alive somewhere, would you save her too? Complete silence fell over the camp. The fire crackled. Wind whispered through the canyon. Somewhere far off, a coyote called to the rising moon. Ethan Cole sat absolutely still, his hand frozen halfway to his mouth. His gray eyes fixed on Iris, and in their depths, Kate saw an ocean of pain, deep and old and never healed. Every adult in the camp held their breath. Even the children sensed the weight of the moment. Finally, Ethan set down his piece of meat. He reached out with his right hand and very gently stroked Iris's tangled hair. If I knew someone needed saving, I wouldn't have walked past. Iris smiled, then the first real smile Kate had seen from the child since the attack. With the simple trust that only children possess, she curled up against Ethan's side and fell asleep. Ethan did not move. His hand hovered in the air, uncertain, trembling slightly. Then slowly it came to rest on Iris's back, a gentle, protective weight. Kate watched a single tear track down Ethan's weathered cheek. He turned his face away quickly, wiping it on his shoulder, but she had seen. This man, whoever he was, carried a grief so deep it had carved canyons in his soul. Later that night, after the children had fallen into exhausted sleep, Kate sat by the dying fire with baby Daniel dozing in her arms. Ethan sat across from her, sharpening his knife on a whetstone with slow, methodical strokes, the sound rhythmic and almost soothing. You don't sleep. Only when it rains. Why are you helping us? The scraping of steel on stone stopped. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I had a little sister, Rachel, 9 years old. Blonde hair, loved picking wildflowers. Kate waited, sensing this story needed space to breathe. Spring of '71. Scarlet fever swept through our town. Parents tried everything, medicine, prayer, cold water baths. Nothing worked. His hand tightened on the knife handle. I sat with her every night, held her hand, promised her she'd get better. What happened? She died just before dawn on a Tuesday. I was holding her when it happened. Ethan's voice was flat, emotionless, but his knuckles were white on the knife. I left home after that. Couldn't stand the silence. My parents, they never looked at each other again. House felt like a tomb. Kate felt tears prick her eyes. I'm so sorry. Ethan finally looked up and his eyes met hers across the fire. I failed her. My own sister and I couldn't save her. So when I see children who need help, I can't just walk away. Because maybe if I save enough of them, it'll make up for the one I lost. That's not how it works. You can't trade lives like currency. I know. Ethan's smile was bitter. But I have to try anyway. They sat in silence for a while. Then Kate asked the question that had been nagging at her since he first appeared. Your arm. What happened? Ethan glanced down at the stump of his left arm, as if he had almost forgotten it was gone. Train accident 2 years ago, working on the railroad in Colorado. Got crushed between 2 freight cars trying to pull a worker off the tracks. Doctors had to amputate to stop the infection. Did you save him, the worker? Yeah, he lived, got married last year, had a baby girl. Ethan's laugh was hollow. Never even thanked me, but that's all right. I didn't do it for thanks. Then why do you look so sad about it? Ethan met her gaze. Because I saved a stranger but couldn't save my own sister. What kind of man does that make me, Kate? Kate shifted baby Daniel in her arms and leaned forward. The kind who deserves a second chance. Ethan did not respond, but he did not look away either. A sound broke the moment, scratching soft and hesitant. At the edge of the canvas shelter, Ethan's hand went immediately to his knife. A dog appeared in the firelight, wild, emaciated, its ribs showing through matted fur. Its eyes darted from Ethan to the children, wary but desperate. Ethan tossed a bone from the rabbit carcass toward it. The dog snatched it and retreated into the darkness. Poor thing, Kate murmured. Been hungry too long, Ethan said. Might come back. In the morning, the dog was still there, lying under a scrub tree, watching them with intelligent eyes. Lucas, the silent boy, spoke his second sentence since the attack. Can we keep him? Ethan looked at the child, then at the dog. He's wild, might bite. Lucas said nothing more, but his expression was so full of longing that even Sophie noticed. Iris crawled to the edge of the camp and set down her piece of hardtack biscuit. Doggy eat, Iris not hungry, her stomach growled loudly, betraying the lie. Ethan sighed. He walked to his pack, retrieved a strip of jerky, and tossed it near the dog. The animal crept forward, took the food, and settled a few feet closer to the camp. We'll call him Ash, Sophie announced, because he came when the fire was dying, like ashes left behind. That afternoon, as Ethan taught Sophie how to tie proper knots using both her hands, the girl asked quietly, Mr. Ethan, if bad men come, will you fight them? Ethan did not hesitate. Yes, even if it's dangerous. He looked at the 5 children, then at Kate resting in the shade with both babies. Especially if it's dangerous. Sophie seemed satisfied with that answer. But what none of them knew, what they could not see, was that on the ridge 300 yards away, a man crouched behind a boulder with a spyglass pressed to his eye. Victor Crane had been tracking them for 2 days. He lowered the glass and turned to the 3 men with him. Found them. 1 man, 1 pregnant woman, 5 kids. This'll be easier than I thought. One of his companions, a thin man named Silas, grinned. The man only has 1 arm. Shouldn't be much trouble. Victor smiled coldly. Those orphans will fetch good money in the mines down south. And that pregnant woman, some ranch owner, will pay well for a wife who comes with ready-made children. He mounted his horse. We move at dawn. Let them rest tonight. Tired people fight less. As Victor and his men rode away to make camp, Ethan stood on the plateau and looked out at the desert. The hair on the back of his neck prickled. Years of surviving on instinct told him something was wrong. He checked his Colt Navy revolver. 6 shots, 42 years old, missing an arm, responsible for 1 pregnant woman and 5 children. The odds were not good. But Ethan Cole had stopped caring about odds the day his sister died in his arms. He walked back to the shelter where Kate was putting the children to bed. Emma looked up at him with those trusting blue eyes. Mr. Ethan, will you stay with us? Ethan knelt down beside the little girl. As long as you need me. Promise. He thought of Rachel, of all the promises he had made, and broken, of the one chance he had now to make something right. I promise. That night, while the others slept, Ethan sat watch by the fire. In his hand, he held a small photograph worn soft at the edges from years of handling. A 9-year-old girl with blonde hair smiled up at him from the faded image. I'm trying, Rachel. I know I couldn't save you, but maybe I can save them. Maybe that's enough. The fire burned low, stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and in the shelter, 6 people who had been strangers 4 days ago slept as a family, protected by a broken man who had finally found something worth fighting for. Tomorrow would bring danger. Tomorrow would test them all. But tonight, for these few precious hours, they were safe. And sometimes in a world as harsh as the Arizona desert, safety was the only miracle that mattered. Dawn broke cold over the plateau, the kind of cold that comes only in the desert when night surrenders today. Ethan had not slept. He sat with his back against the boulder, the Colt Navy in his lap, watching the eastern horizon bleed from black to purple to amber. His gray eyes tracked every shadow, every movement in the scrub brush below. Ash suddenly lifted his head. His ears went flat against his skull. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest, barely audible but unmistakable. Ethan was on his feet in an instant. The growl became a bark, then frantic, urgent barking directed at the southern ridge. The dog's hackles rose like quills, every muscle in his emaciated body tensed for fight or flight. Kate emerged from the shelter, her hair loose around her shoulders, one hand pressed to her swollen belly. What's wrong? Ethan did not take his eyes off the horizon. Something out there, or someone. He climbed swiftly to a higher vantage point, moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who had learned to compensate for his missing limb. From the top of a flat boulder, he could see for miles in every direction. There, to the south, a dust cloud rising in the still morning air. Riders, multiple horses moving at a steady pace, not the random wandering of travelers. This was purposeful, deliberate. They were being hunted. Ethan scrambled down and strode back to the camp. His face was grim. We need to move now. Sophie appeared in the shelter entrance, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Who is it? Don't know. Don't care to find out. He began gathering their supplies with rapid one-handed movements. Could be scouts. Could be worse. Kate started to rise, then gasped. Her hand flew to her abdomen, fingers splaying across the taut fabric of her dress. Her face went white. Ethan, I can't. He was beside her in 2 strides. Show me. She pulled back her dress enough to reveal her swollen belly. It was hard as stone, rigid with tension. A contraction, but too strong, too early. Her pregnancy was only 7 months along. This should not be happening yet. Ethan had seen enough battlefield injuries to recognize a body pushed past its limits. Kate's frame was skeletal from starvation. Her skin carried the gray pallor of exhaustion. The walk through the desert, the heat, the stress, it had all taken a brutal toll. If they moved her now, traveling over rough terrain, she would likely miscarry. Or worse, if they stayed, whoever was tracking them would find them. The mathematics of survival once again offered no good options. Ethan made his decision in the space of a heartbeat. We stay. I'll fortify this place. Lucas stepped forward, his voice small but steady. But there are many of them. We saw the dust. Ethan looked at the boy, at all the children watching him with fear in their eyes. Then I'll make them regret being many. He spent the next 6 hours transforming the plateau into a fortress. First, the perimeter fence. Ethan cut mesquite branches with his Bowie knife, each stroke precise despite using only his right hand. He sharpened the ends into wicked points and drove them into the ground in a circle around the camp. The posts were spaced 6 inches apart, close enough that a horse could not pass between them, and far enough that he could see through to spot approaching threats. Then the trench. Using a piece of flat wood as a shovel, he dug a shallow ditch just in front of the fence line, 2 feet deep, filled with thorny cholla cactus branches. Anyone trying to breach the fence on foot would step directly onto spines that could penetrate boot leather. Tripwires came next. Ethan strung thin rope at ankle height between bushes and rocks, each one connected to small bells salvaged from his pack. An intruder would not see the wires until too late, and the bells would give him precious seconds of warning. Finally, he built a sniper position on the highest point of the plateau, flat rocks stacked to create a low wall. From here, a man could lie prone and have a clear line of sight in all directions while remaining mostly hidden. Sophie watched every move. She was a quick study, her 8-year-old mind absorbing the lessons without being told. When Ethan took a break to drink water, she approached him. Teach me to load the gun. Not a request, a demand. Ethan studied her for a long moment. She was just a child, but children did not survive the frontier by staying children. He handed her the Colt Navy. Hold it with both hands. Thumb on the hammer here. Press down. Rotate the cylinder. See these chambers. Each one holds a bullet. Her hands shook as she tried to mimic his movements. The revolver was heavy, designed for a grown man's grip. I'm scared I'll do it wrong. Ethan's voice was firm but not unkind. Scared is good. Keeps you sharp. But when the moment comes, you can't let fear stop you from protecting your family. Sophie's jaw tightened. They're not my real family. Ethan looked at her directly, his gray eyes steady and certain. Family isn't about blood. It's about who you'd die for. And I think you already know who that is. Sophie said nothing, but she practiced loading and unloading the cylinder until her movements became smooth and sure. With Lucas, Ethan's lesson was different. He gave the boy a bone whistle, the kind used by shepherds to call their dogs across long distances. The high-pitched sound could carry for a quarter mile. If you see anyone cross that fence line, blow 3 short blasts. I'll know. Lucas nodded solemnly and tucked the whistle into his shirt pocket right over his heart. Kate, despite her pain and weakness, refused to be idle. She sat in the shade of the shelter and sewed cloth into small bags, filling them with fist-sized rocks. Improvised weapons. If fighting came to close quarters, even a child could throw a rock. Her hands trembled as she worked, but her face was set with determination. Emma, too young to help with preparations, sat beside her mother and sang softly. Old hymns their family used to sing in church back in Illinois. The melody was thin and fragile in the vast desert silence, but it gave them something to hold on to besides fear. By late afternoon, the camp was as ready as Ethan could make it. It would not stop a determined assault, but it would slow them down, make them think twice. And in a fight, hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. The sun was westering toward the horizon when the riders appeared. Three men on horseback emerging from the heat shimmer like ghosts solidifying into flesh. They rode with the casual confidence of predators who had found easy prey. Ethan positioned himself at the front of the camp, standing between the approaching riders and the shelter where Kate and the children waited. His right hand hung loose at his side, seemingly relaxed, but his thumb was hooked in his belt, inches from the Colt Navy holstered at his hip. The lead rider was a man in his mid-40s, wearing a long duster coat despite the heat. His black hat was pulled low, shadowing eyes that were pale blue and cold as winter ice. A neatly trimmed beard framed a mouth that smiled too easily. Behind him rode two others. One was thin and wiry with a knife sheath at his belt and a scar running the length of his left cheek. The other was broad-shouldered and heavy, a shotgun resting across his saddle horn. The leader reined his horse to a stop 20 feet from Ethan. His smile widened, showing teeth that were surprisingly white and even. "Good afternoon, friend. Fine little setup you have here." Ethan's expression did not change. "State your business or leave." The man's smile never wavered. "Now, is that any way to greet a fellow traveler? I'm Victor Crane. These are my associates, Silas and Dutch." He gestured to his companions with a negligent wave. "Heard tell there's a widow woman traveling with some orphan children in these parts. Tragic situation. We've come to help." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. "I have legal papers here, custody agreements all properly notarized. Turns out a couple of those little ones are blood kin to me. Come to bring them to a proper home, not this." He gestured dismissively at the camp. "Makeshift arrangement." Ethan's voice was flat. "They have a home right here." Victor's smile finally slipped just a fraction. "Now, friend, the law says different. I'm family to those children. Got the papers to prove it. You're just some drifter who happened along. Which one of us you think a judge will favor?" From inside the shelter, a child's voice rang out sharp with fear and fury. "Liar." Sophie burst into view, her small frame vibrating with rage. "I don't know you. You're not my uncle." Victor turned his attention to the girl, his expression shifting to one of practiced sympathy. "Now child trauma does funny things to memory. But your Uncle Victor is here now, gonna take you somewhere safe with good food and a real bed." "My uncle died in the attack." Sophie's hands were balled into fists. "You're lying. The child is confused." Victor said smoothly, addressing Ethan again. "Understandable given what she's been through. But the law is clear. I have legal claim." Ethan took a single step forward. The girl said no. "That's all the law I need." The temperature of the conversation dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Victor's smile vanished completely. When he spoke again, his voice carried an edge like broken glass. "You don't want to do this, cripple. One arm against three guns. Do the math." Silas and Dutch let their hands drift toward their weapons. Ethan did not move, did not blink. Math doesn't account for desperation. And I'm very desperate to keep them safe. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then Kate stepped out of the shelter. She moved slowly, one hand supporting her swollen belly, the other cradling baby Daniel. Her dress was stained and torn, her face gaunt from starvation, but she held her head high. "These children are under my protection. You will not take them." Victor laughed, a short barking sound devoid of humor. "Ma'am, you can barely stand. What exactly do you think you can do?" Kate met his gaze without flinching. "I can die trying to stop you, and I promise if you force me to, I'll take at least one of you with me." Silas snorted. Big talk from a pregnant woman. That was when Sophie appeared again. She was holding the Colt Navy revolver in both hands exactly as Ethan had taught her. The barrel was pointed directly at Victor Crane's chest. Her arms shook from the weight of the weapon, but her finger rested on the trigger. "I'll shoot." Her voice was high and thin but determined. "I don't care what happens to me. You're not taking us." Every man froze. Victor raised his hands in a placating gesture, though his eyes littered with something dangerous. "Easy there, little girl. You don't want to do something you'll regret." "I already regret not shooting you the second you rode up." Time seemed to slow. Ethan could see it all unfolding like a nightmare he was powerless to stop. Sophie's finger tightening on the trigger. The recoil she would not be ready for. The bullet that might go anywhere. "Sophie," his voice was quiet. "Put it down." No, her voice broke. He wants to take us. He wants to sell us. Victor's voice dripped false concern. Now, sweetheart, nobody's selling anyone. Where did you get such a terrible idea? Because I heard you. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but her hands stayed steady. Last night, when you thought everyone was asleep, I heard you tell Silas that orphans fetch good money at the Mexican mines. Victor's expression flickered. Just for a second, the mask slipped and something cruel and calculating showed underneath. That second was all Sophie needed. She pulled the trigger. The gun roared. The recoil sent Sophie stumbling backward, the heavy weapon flying from her hands. The bullet went wide, missing Victor, but striking the shoulder of Silas's horse. The animal screamed and reared its front hooves, pawing the air. Silas, caught off guard, tumbled from the saddle and hit the ground hard. Chaos erupted. Dutch went for his shotgun. Ethan's hand moved in a blur, drawing and firing in one smooth motion. The bullet caught Dutch in the forearm, shattering bone. The shotgun clattered to the ground as Dutch howled and clutched his ruined wrist. Victor wheeled his horse around, reaching for his own weapon. Ethan fired again. This time the bullet struck the pommel of Victor's saddle, sending splinters of wood flying. Victor's horse bolted, and he had to choose between controlling the animal or drawing his gun. He chose the horse. Silas scrambled to his feet, running for the cover of the rocks. Dutch followed, cradling his bleeding arm. Within seconds, both men had disappeared into the desert scrub. Victor brought his mount under control 30 yards away. He sat there, chest heaving, staring at Ethan with naked hatred. This isn't over. His cultured accent had stripped away to reveal something feral underneath. I'll be back with more men, and when I come, I'll take everything. The children, the woman, and I'll make you watch before I kill you. Ethan raised the Colt and aimed at Victor's head. Then I'll be waiting. For a moment, it seemed as though Ethan might actually pull the trigger. His finger rested on the smooth curve of metal, 1 pound of pressure. That was all it would take. But he did not fire. Victor seemed to sense the hesitation. He smiled, a terrible expression, full of promised violence. Then he spurred his horse and galloped away, dust rising in his wake. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan lowered his weapon and turned to find Sophie standing exactly where she had fallen. The revolver lay at her feet. Her whole body shook so violently, her teeth chattered. Kate rushed to the girl and wrapped her in a fierce embrace. It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe. You did what you had to do. But Sophie was not crying. She was staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. I almost killed him. The words were barely a whisper. I almost killed a person. What does that make me? Ethan knelt in front of her, bringing himself to her eye level. It makes you a survivor. There's a difference, said Gwen. I feel like a monster. Monsters don't feel bad about hurting people. You do. That means you're not a monster. That means you're still human. Lucas appeared and silently wrapped his arms around Sophie from behind. Iris toddled over and hugged Sophie's leg. Emma pressed against her other side. You saved us, Lucas said quietly. It was the most words he had spoken at one time since the attack. Sophie finally broke. Great racking sobs tore from her chest. She cried for her dead parents, for the violence she had been forced to commit, for the innocence she could never reclaim. Kate held her through it all, rocking gently, whispering reassurances that probably meant nothing but were offered anyway. Ethan stood and walked to the edge of the plateau. He reloaded his Colt with practiced movements, dropping the spent casings and sliding fresh rounds into the cylinder. 3 bullets left now. And Victor Crane would be back, just as he had promised. The question was not if, but when. That night, after the children had finally fallen into exhausted sleep, Kate sat beside Ethan at the fire. Baby Daniel, whom they had started calling Hope because he should not still be alive, but was kicked forcefully enough in her womb that Kate winced. They'll come back. It was not a question. Yes. How many do you think Ethan considered? Victor Crane, I've heard the name. Slaver mostly, smuggles people south to the mines and factories where they work until they die. Sometimes sells women to ranchers looking for wives. Always has at least 6 or 7 men riding with him. Kate's hand tightened on her belly. Can we run? Not in your condition. You go into labor while we're traveling. You and the baby both die. Then what do we do? Ethan stared into the flames. We make our stand here. We fight. And we hope it's enough. Kate was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. I used to think I knew what fear was. being afraid of the dark as a child, afraid of childbirth, afraid of losing Michael. She looked at Ethan with eyes that had seen too much. But this is different. This is the fear of knowing I might watch my children die, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Ethan reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was calloused and rough, marked by years of hard labor. I've carried fear for 12 years. Fear that I'll fail again the way I failed Rachel. But you know what I've learned? What fear doesn't go away. You just learn to walk with it. And sometimes if you're lucky, you find people worth being afraid for. Kate squeezed his hand. You're a good man, Ethan Cole. I'm a broken man. There's a difference, no. Her voice was firm. You're a man who was broken and chose to keep going anyway. That's not the same as being broken. That's being strong. They sat holding hands until the fire died to embers. The next morning brought clouds piling up in the west like mountains. The air grew thick and heavy, pressing down with the weight of impending violence. Lightning flickered inside the cloud mass, too far away to hear the thunder, but close enough to see the veins of electricity splitting the sky. Ethan looked up and swore softly. Monsoon season. Should have realized. It's that bad. July and August Arizona gets storms that come out of nowhere. Rain, hail, flash floods. Lightning that can kill a man from a clear sky. He immediately began reinforcing the shelter, adding more support poles, tying down the canvas with extra rope. Kate helped as much as she could, though every movement sent sharp pains through her abdomen. The children sensed the adults' fear. They huddled together in the shelter, watching the sky darken from blue to gray to an ominous greenish black. Then the wind arrived. It came screaming across the desert like a living thing tearing at the shelter, whipping sand into stinging clouds. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in 15 minutes. And then Kate screamed. Ethan spun to find her doubled over, both hands clutching her belly. Fluid soaked her dress, darkening the fabric. Her water had broken. No. The word escaped Ethan's lips before he could stop it. Not now. Not here. Kate's face was white with pain and fear. The baby doesn't care about timing. The first drops of rain fell, not gently but like bullets fired from the sky. Within seconds, it became a deluge rain so thick and heavy that Ethan could not see more than 5 feet in any direction. Lightning struck a tree 100 yards away. The crack of thunder was simultaneous and deafening. The tree exploded into flames that were immediately extinguished by the rain. Inside the shelter, controlled chaos reigned. Emma was crying. Baby Daniel wailed. Sophie tried to keep the younger children calm, but her own face was pale with terror. Lucas clutched the bone whistle in his hand as if it were a talisman that could protect them. Ethan had delivered exactly 0 babies in his 42 years of life, but he had sewn up gut wounds on battlefields, set broken bones in field hospitals, pulled men back from the edge of death through sheer stubborn refusal to let them go. This could not be that different. He hoped. Sophie, his voice cut through the noise of wind and rain and crying children. Boil water. Use the pot outside, but be careful. The fire might not stay lit. Lucas, find every piece of clean cloth we have. Tear them into strips if you have to. Emma, hold your mama's hand. Talk to her. Keep her with us. The children scattered to their tasks, desperate for something to do besides be afraid. Ethan knelt beside Kate and met her eyes. I need you to listen to me very carefully. This is going to hurt. It's going to hurt worse than anything you've ever felt. But you're going to live through it. Do you understand me? Kate nodded, unable to speak through the pain. You're going to live because those children need you, because I need you. So no matter how bad it gets, you stay with me. Promise me. I promise. She gasped. Another contraction hit. Kate's scream tore through the storm. Outside, lightning struck again and again, turning the world into a nightmare of flash and shadow. The shelter shook with each thunderclap. Rain hammered the canvas roof like fists demanding entry. Sophie returned with a pot of boiling water, her dress soaked through, hands red from the heat of the metal. Lucas brought strips of cloth torn from the cleanest garments they had. Ethan washed his hand in the scalding water, then positioned himself at Kate's feet. He had no medical training, no idea what he was doing, just instinct and desperation. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost all meaning in the storm. Kate screamed until her voice gave out, then screamed in silence, her mouth open, tendons standing out in her neck. Ethan coached her through each contraction, his voice steady even though his hands shook. Emma held her mother's hand and sang hymns through her tears. Sophie dampened cloths and pressed them to Kate's forehead. Lucas stood guard at the entrance, watching for threats that might come even in the middle of the storm. And then, at the darkest moment, when Kate's eyes began to roll back, and Ethan felt the ice of failure creeping up his spine, Kate gave one final tremendous push. The baby slipped into Ethan's waiting hand. A boy, tiny gray, not breathing. Ethan's heart stopped. Not again. Please, God, not again. He turned the infant over and rubbed the small back with his palm. Firm circular motions. Nothing. He rubbed harder, whispering prayers or curses or both. Come on. Come on. Breathe, damn you. 1 second. 2. 3. Ethan thought of Rachel, of all the prayers that had gone unanswered, of a universe that took children and left broken men behind. Please, the word was barely a whisper. Just this once, please. A cough, weak and wet but unmistakable. Then a cry, thin and reedy, barely audible over the storm, but the most beautiful sound Ethan had ever heard. The baby was alive. Ethan wrapped the child in the cleanest cloth and placed him on Kate's chest. She was barely conscious, her skin gray with exhaustion and blood loss. But when she felt the baby against her, her eyes opened. Boy or girl, boy. Strong boy. Kate's lips curved in the faintest smile. Name him Hope, because he shouldn't be alive, but he is. Then her eyes closed and she went limp. Ethan's hand flew to her neck, searching for a pulse. There, weak and thready, but there. She had not died, just fainted from exhaustion. He quickly delivered the afterbirth, checked Kate for excessive bleeding, did what he could to make her comfortable. Then he collapsed against the shelter wall, baby Hope cradled in the crook of his remaining arm. The children crowded around, staring in wonder at the tiny wrinkled creature who had fought his way into the world during a desert monsoon. Is he going to be okay? Emma asked. Ethan looked down at the baby. Hope's eyes were closed, his miniature fists waving aimlessly. He was far too small, born weeks early, but his chest rose and fell with steady breaths. I think so. I think he's going to be just fine. Sophie reached out tentatively and touched one of Hope's tiny hands. The baby's fingers closed reflexively around her finger. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. He's so small. He's a fighter, Ethan said. Just like his mother. The storm raged through the night. But inside the shelter, huddled together in the darkness, 7 people who had been strangers a week ago held each other close. Kate unconscious but alive. Baby Hope impossibly fragile but breathing. Baby Daniel. Emma, Sophie, Lucas, and Iris. And Ethan Cole, the broken man with one arm who had somehow managed to deliver a child in the middle of a monsoon. By dawn, the storm had passed. Ethan stepped outside to survey the damage. The shelter had held, though barely. The fence was partially flattened. The fire pit was flooded. But they were alive. He stood there in the pale morning light, soaked to the skin, exhausted beyond measure. And for the first time in 12 years, he felt something other than grief. He felt purpose. Behind him, he heard Kate stirring. He turned to find her awake, baby Hope nursing at her breast. She looked like death warmed over, but she was smiling. We made it. We made it. Ethan agreed. That was when Ash started barking again. Ethan's head snapped up. In the distance, moving through the morning mist, he could see them. 8 riders, all armed, led by Victor Crane. They had come for revenge. Ethan checked his Colt Navy. 3 bullets left. He had a knife, 1 arm, and 6 people depending on him for protection. One of those people had given birth hours ago. 2 were infants. 3 were children under 9 years old. The mathematics of survival had never looked worse. But Ethan Cole had stopped caring about mathematics the day his sister died. He turned to the shelter. Sophie, Lucas, come here. The 2 oldest children emerged. They looked at him with complete trust. What we talked about, Ethan said quietly. The time has come. Are you ready? Sophie straightened her spine. Yes, Lucas nodded. Ethan looked at them for a long moment. They were so young, too young for what he was about to ask of them. But the desert did not care about should or should not. It only cared about what was. Then let's show them what it means to attack a family. The riders drew closer. 8 against 1. But the 1 had something the 8 did not. He had everything to lose. And that made him the most dangerous man in the Arizona territory. The 8 riders spread out in a semicircle around the plateau, positioning themselves at intervals that cut off every escape route. They moved with practiced efficiency, men who had done this many times before, predators who knew their prey was trapped. Victor Crane sat astride a black horse at the center of the formation. Even from a distance, Ethan could see the bandage wrapped around the man's calf, where yesterday's bullet had grazed him. The wound would be painful, infected perhaps, which meant Victor was riding on anger and pride, now the most dangerous combination. Ethan Cole, Victor's voice carried across the morning stillness. You have one chance. Send out the woman and children, and I'll let you ride away. You have my word. Ethan stood at the edge of the fortified camp, his right hand hanging loose at his side. He did not bother to respond. Victor Crane's word was worth less than the dust beneath his boots. Inside the shelter, Kate struggled to sit up. She had lost a dangerous amount of blood during the birth. Her skin had the translucent quality of paper, her lips colorless. When she moved, pain etched deep lines around her eyes. Ethan. Her voice was weak. What's happening? He glanced back. Stay down. Keep the babies quiet. I can handle this. I can fight. You can barely stand. Your job is to protect the little ones. Let me handle this. Kate wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. Another wave of dizziness forced her back down. She clutched baby Hope to her chest and pulled Emma and baby Daniel close. Iris crawled into the shelter and pressed against Kate's side. Sophie appeared at Ethan's elbow, the Colt Navy gripped in both hands exactly as he had taught her. Her face was pale but determined. I'm ready. Ethan looked down at her, 8 years old, blonde hair tangled from the storm eyes that had seen her parents murdered and had nearly killed a man herself yesterday. No child should have to carry these burdens, but the desert did not care what children should or should not bear. Remember, Ethan's voice was quiet. Aim for center basas. Don't think, just shoot. What if I miss, then shoot again? Lucas stood nearby, one hand wrapped around the bone whistle. His face was blank, but Ethan could see the boy's chest rising and falling too quickly. Fear threatened to overwhelm him. Ethan placed his hand on Lucas's shoulder. When I give the signal, you blow that whistle as loud as you can. 3 times. Understand? Lucas nodded wordlessly. Good boy. Victor's voice rang out again. I'm losing patience, Cole. You have 10 seconds. Ethan walked forward until he stood at the gap in the fence, the only entrance to the camp. He planted his feet and met Victor's gaze across the distance. Come and take them. His voice was not loud, but something in it carried. A finality. A promise of violence. Victor's smile was a slash of white in his bearded face. So be it. Boys, bring them to me. The woman too. I want him alive for a while. The 8 men began to advance. They came slowly, weapons-drawn horses picking their way carefully through the desert scrub. Silas was among them, his thin face twisted with anticipation of revenge. Dutch rode with his injured arm strapped across his chest, but his good hand held a revolver. The other 5 were strangers to Ethan, but he could read their type easily enough. Hard men who had done terrible things and would do more without hesitation. When they were 50 yards out, Ethan raised his voice. Last warning, turn back now. Victor laughed. With what, 3 bullets against 8 of us, the mathematics aren't in your favor, old man. Then let me teach you some new mathematics. Ethan fired. The shot took Silas's horse in the chest. The animal went down instantly, throwing Silas forward. The thin man hit the ground hard and lay still, either unconscious or dead. 7. The remaining riders spurred their horses, breaking into a gallop. They had closed to 30 yards when Ethan fired his second shot. This one caught Dutch in the shoulder, spinning him sideways in his saddle. Dutch managed to keep his seat, but dropped his gun. 6.5. Ethan dove behind the rock wall he had built, reloading as he moved. His fingers worked with desperate speed, fumbling fresh cartridges into the cylinder with his single hand. Bullets chewed up the dirt around him. Rock chips exploded from the wall, stinging his face. He could hear hoofbeats pounding closer, the shouts of men working themselves into a killing frenzy. Then Lucas's whistle split the air. 3 sharp blasts, piercing and clear. The tripwires activated. 2 horses hit the thin rope stretched ankle-high across the approach. Both animals went down in a tangle of legs and screaming. Their riders were thrown tumbling across the ground. 4.5. One of the thrown men tried to stand. Sophie stepped into view and fired. The Colt kicked in her hand, sending her stumbling backward. The shot went high but close enough that the man dove for cover instead of charging. The remaining riders reached the fence line and discovered the Cholla cactus trench. The first horse tried to jump it and landed directly on the thorny branches. The animal's screams were terrible and immediate. It bucked and thrashed, scattering cactus spines everywhere. Its rider bailed off, hit the ground running, and promptly stepped on more spines hidden in the dirt. 3.5. Ethan rose from behind his wall and fired. The running man collapsed, clutching his leg. 3. Victor Crane remained mounted well back from the chaos. He was shouting orders that no one could hear over the screaming horses and cursing men. 2 of the remaining riders dismounted and approached on foot using their horses as shields. They were 20 yards out when Ethan fired again. One man spun and fell. 2.5. Click. Ethan pulled the trigger and heard the empty chamber rotate. He was out of ammunition. 2 men were still advancing. Victor was reaching for his rifle. And Ethan Cole had nothing left but a knife and sheer stubborn refusal to let these men win. He drew the Bowie knife and prepared to charge. That was when gunfire came from the wrong direction. Shots rang out from the ridge to the east, bullets kicking up dirt at the feet of Victor's men. The 2 advancing riders spun confused, trying to identify this new threat. 4 men on horseback appeared on the ridgeline. The morning sun rose behind them, turning them into black silhouettes. But the glint of metal on one man's chest was unmistakable. A badge. Federal Marshal, a voice boomed across the desert. Drop your weapons. You're all under arrest. Ethan's brain struggled to process what he was seeing. Reinforcements. Help. Where had they come from? Victor clearly had the same question. His face went from confident to calculating in an instant. He yanked his horse around and spurted hard, galloping away from the camp toward the south. Crane, the marshal shouted. Stop or I'll shoot. Victor did not stop. The marshal's rifle cracked once. Victor's horse stumbled, but kept running. A second shot. This time Victor jerked in the saddle but remained upright. He disappeared into a ravine, and the sound of hoofbeats faded. The 2 men who had been advancing on Ethan threw down their guns and raised their hands. The others, who were still conscious, did the same. Within minutes, the fight was over. The 4 lawmen rode into camp. The leader was a man in his early 50s, with steel gray hair and a beard to match. Deep lines bracketed his mouth and eyes, the marks of a hard life honestly lived. The badge pinned to his vest read, U.S. Marshal. He dismounted with the ease of long practice and approached Ethan with his hand extended. Marshal Samuel Brooks, Fort Yuma. Ethan stared at the hand for a moment before shaking it. His own hand was trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. Ethan Cole, how did you find us? Got word from Fort Yuma over a week ago about Victor Crane operating in this territory. We've been tracking him since then. Brooks looked around at the fortified camp, at the traps and defenses, at Sophie still holding the empty revolver. Looks like you didn't need much help. We needed every bit, Ethan said honestly. Brooks gestured to his men. Round them up. Any who can walk, bind their hands. Any who can't, make them comfortable until we can send a wagon. As the deputies went to work, Brooks turned his attention back to Ethan. His eyes took in the missing arm, the exhaustion etched into every line of Ethan's face, the way he swayed slightly on his feet. You all right, son? I'll be once I know my family is safe. Brooks's eyebrows rose slightly at the word family, but he did not comment. They're safe now. Crane is wounded and on the run. We'll catch him within the day. His men are finished. Ethan felt his legs give out. He sat down hard on the ground, his back against a boulder. The knife slipped from his fingers. Now that the danger had passed, his body was claiming its due. Every muscle screamed. His head pounded. He realized distantly that he had been awake for more than 40 hours. Sophie appeared beside him and wordlessly leaned against his shoulder. Lucas sat on his other side. Both children were filthy, exhausted, and traumatized, but alive. You did good, Ethan told them. Both of you, real good. I was so scared, Sophie whispered. Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. Being brave means acting even when you're scared, Marshal Brooks called over one of his deputies. Dalton, go check on the woman and children in that shelter. See if they need medical attention. The deputy hurried over and ducked inside. A moment later, his head emerged. Marshal, we need a doctor. Woman here just gave birth. She's in bad shape. Brooks frowned. Nearest doctor is Fort Yuma. Half a day's ride. She fit to travel. Ethan pushed himself to his feet, ignoring his body's protests. No. Moving her could kill her. Then we bring the doctor here. Brooks turned to another deputy. Monroe, ride hard for the bird. Bring Doc Peterson and supplies. Tell him it's urgent. As Monroe galloped away, Brooks pulled a folded document from his saddlebag. Mr. Cole, while we're waiting, there are some legal matters we need to discuss. Ethan wanted nothing more than to sleep, but he forced himself to focus. What matters the children? The orphans, specifically. We found records on Crane's men. They've been trafficking in human cargo for 2 years. Dozens of children bought and sold. Brooks's expression was grim. Those 3 young ones you have, they have no living family. Their parents were the last of their lines. Ethan's chest tightened. What happens to them? Normally orphanage back east. But given the circumstances, and given that you clearly have been caring for them, the territorial judge authorized me to offer you legal guardianship, if you want it. Ethan turned and looked at the shelter, at Sophie and Lucas beside him, at Iris's small face peering out from the canvas opening. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail them? Brooks followed his gaze. Mr. Cole, you just fought off 8 armed men to protect them. You built defenses one-handed that would make an Army engineer proud. From what I can see, you already are their father. This just makes it legal. Ethan's throat felt tight. I never thought I'd get a second chance. None of us do. But when we get one, we'd best take it. Ethan walked to the shelter and knelt down. Sophie, Lucas, and Iris gathered around him. 3 pairs of eyes watched him with a mixture of hope and fear. I want you to understand something. Ethan spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. I'm not your real father. I can't replace the parents you lost. But if you'll have me, I'll try my best to be what you need. Iris did not hesitate. She threw her arms around Ethan's neck. You already, Papa Ethan. Sophie was more reserved. What if we make you angry? What if we are too much trouble? Ethan looked at the 8-year-old who had nearly killed a man to protect her makeshift family. Then we'll figure it out together. That's what families do. Lucas, the boy who barely spoke, asked the question that mattered most. Will you leave us? Never. I promise you, I will never leave you. Lucas nodded once satisfied. He stepped forward and hugged Ethan's waist. Sophie joined a moment later. Then all 3 children were wrapped around him, and Ethan felt something inside his chest that had been frozen for 12 years finally begin to thaw. Marshal Brooks cleared his throat. I'll take that as a yes. Sign here. Ethan marked the guardianship papers with his name. It was official. Sophie Reynolds, Lucas Hayes, and Iris Patterson were now his legal children. Brooks had one more document. There's also the matter of this land. Under the Homestead Act of 1862, any citizen can claim 160 acres of public land. You've been living here, improving it, defending it. That gives you the right to file a claim if you want. Ethan looked around at the plateau. It was harsh, unforgiving country, but it had water, defensible positions, and room to grow. It could be something. I want it. Then it's yours. Welcome to land ownership, Mr. Cole. The doctor arrived 6 hours later. He was an older man, portly and professorial, with spectacles perched on his nose and a medical bag that had seen better days. He examined Kate thoroughly, clucking his tongue at her condition. Remarkable that she survived. Most women wouldn't have under these circumstances. He gave her a tonic for the blood loss, stitched a small tear, and pronounced that, with rest and proper food, she would recover. Baby Hope he examined with equal care. Premature, but his lungs sound good. Keep him warm. Feed him often. He has a fighting chance. Over the next 3 weeks, the camp transformed. With Marshal Brooks's help, Ethan received supplies from Fort Yuma. Proper lumber nails tools. He began building a real cabin, working dawn to dusk. The structure rose slowly but surely. 2 rooms with a stone fireplace and a sturdy roof. Kate grew stronger each day. Color returned to her cheeks. She could walk without assistance, then help with light chores, then take over running the household while Ethan built. The children adapted in their own ways. Sophie discovered she had a talent for numbers and began keeping careful inventory of their supplies, calculating what they needed and when. Lucas, still quiet, showed an aptitude for working with his hands. He helped Ethan with the building, learning quickly how to measure and cut and fasten. Iris attached herself to Kate completely. She followed the woman everywhere, helping care for baby Daniel and baby Hope, with the fierce devotion of a child who had lost one mother and was determined not to lose another. Emma became the bridge between all of them. She sang and played and made everyone laugh, even on the hardest days. And Ash, the stray dog, grew fat and content. He appointed himself guardian of the babies, sleeping beside their cradle each night. One evening when the cabin was nearly finished and the desert had cooled to something almost pleasant, Ethan and Kate sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Baby Hope slept in Kate's arms, content and gaining weight each day. Baby Daniel played in the dirt nearby building towers that Emma knocked down, making him giggle. "This isn't how I imagined my life would go," Kate said softly. Better or worse, she looked at him with those dark eyes that had seen so much grief and somehow found room for hope anyway. "Different. Michael was a good man. I loved him. But you, Ethan Cole, you're something else entirely." "What am I?" "You're the answer to a prayer I didn't know how to pray." Ethan felt heat rise in his face. He was not good with words, never had been. So instead of speaking, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a ring, simple, crude even. Forged from a single railroad nail, the metal twisted and shaped by patient work over many nights. It was not gold or silver, but it was honest. "Kate Morrison." His voice was rough with emotion. "I'm not a rich man. I'm not even a whole man. But I love you and these children more than I thought I could love anything. Will you marry me?" Kate's eyes filled with tears. She nodded, unable to speak. Ethan tried to slip the ring on her finger, fumbling with his single hand. Kate helped him, guiding it into place. It fit perfectly. Before either of them could say anything more, Sophie appeared from the cabin. Behind her came Lucas, Iris, and Emma. "Wait," Sophie said firmly. "Before you marry him, you have to marry all of us too." Kate blinked. "What do you mean?" The four older children formed a line. One by one, they presented Kate with gifts they had made in secret. Sophie offered a wreath woven from desert grass and wildflowers. "This is from me, because you gave us a home when we had none." Lucas held out a wooden carving, rough but clearly made with care. It showed 7 figures standing together. "This is all of us, a family." Iris, too young to make anything complex, offered a smooth river stone she had found. "For luck," she whispered. Emma presented a ribbon, faded and worn. This was from Mama's dress, the one she wore when she married Papa. "I want you to have it." Kate looked at these offerings, so simple and yet more valuable than any treasure, and openly wept. Sophie spoke for all of them. "You're not just marrying Papa Ethan. You're marrying all of us. We're a package deal." Kate set Baby Hope carefully in Ethan's arm, then pulled all 4 children into a fierce embrace. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Marshall Brooks, who had been staying nearby to ensure Victor Crane was truly dealt with, agreed to perform the ceremony. "It's not official," he warned, "but it's binding in the eyes of God and man. And that's what matters." They stood on the hill behind the cabin as the sun set, Ethan in his cleanest shirt, Kate in a dress she had mended as best she could. The children formed a circle around them. Brooks read from a small Bible he carried. Ethan and Kate spoke their vows, simple words about loving and cherishing and never abandoning. When Brooks pronounced them married, the children cheered. Even baby Daniel clapped his hands, not understanding, but caught up in the joy. That night, Ethan carved a sign from a piece of pine. He worked by firelight, his knife moving with careful precision. When he finished, he showed it to Kate. "Morrison Cole Homestead. We leave no one behind. Establishes 1883. Morrison first," Ethan explained, "because that's the name Emma and Daniel and Hope carry. But Cole too for Sophie and Lucas and Iris, both names. One family." Kate traced the letters with her finger. "It's perfect." They mounted the sign above the cabin door the next morning. It hung there, weathered by sun and storm, a declaration to anyone who passed. Here lived people who had chosen each other, who had fought for each other, who would not leave anyone behind. 6 months passed. The homestead prospered. Ethan proved to be a skilled builder and farmer. He taught the older children everything he knew about surviving in the desert, about reading weather and tracking game and finding water where none seemed to exist. Kate ran the household with quiet competence. She taught the children to read and write using a worn Bible and newspapers the marshal brought from town. She planted a garden that, against all odds, produced vegetables in the harsh soil. Baby Hope thrived. He grew chubby and loud, demanding attention with lungs that seemed impossibly large for such a small body. Then one afternoon, a wagon appeared on the horizon. Ethan grabbed his rifle, now fully loaded, thanks to ammunition from the fort. But as the wagon drew closer, he saw it was driven by a middle-aged couple, haggard and desperate. In the back, two children, huddled together, eyes hollow with shock. Ethan approached cautiously. "Can I help you folks?" The man driving had tears in his eyes. "Apaches hit us 3 days back. Not a raid, just hungry renegades. They killed my brother and his wife. These are their children. We're trying to get to California, but I don't know if we'll make it. Can you spare food, water?" Ethan lowered the rifle. He looked at the two orphan children. A boy, maybe 7, a girl 5. He thought of Sophie, Lucas, and Iris, of the day he had found them, of the choice Kate had made to save them, even when it meant risking everyone. He turned and looked back at the cabin. Kate stood in the doorway, baby Hope on her hip. She met his eyes across the distance. She knew what he was thinking. She nodded. Ethan turned back to the couple. "Come inside. Rest. We'll share what we have." "Thank you," the man said. "Thank you so much." Ethan helped them down from the wagon. The two orphan children clung to their uncle, not understanding why their world had ended. Sophie appeared and crouched down to the girl's level. "Hi, I'm Sophie. You're safe now." The girl looked at Sophie with red-rimmed eyes. "My mama is gone." "I know," Sophie said gently. "Mine too. But you'll be okay, I promise." That evening, after the travelers had eaten and rested, Ethan and Kate spoke with the uncle. He was honest about his situation. He was barely surviving himself. He could not care for 2 more children. He planned to leave them at an orphanage in California if he made it that far. "Or," Ethan said carefully, "you could leave them here." The man looked startled. "Here, but you already have so many." "We do," Kate agreed. "What's 2 more?" The uncle was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "They're good children. They deserve a chance. Then let us give them one." 2 days later, the uncle left. The children stayed. The boy's name was Benjamin. The girl was called Anna. Within a week, they were part of the family. Within a month, they could not imagine being anywhere else. The homestead continued to grow. Ethan built additional rooms onto the cabin. Kate's garden expanded. The children thrived, each finding their place in the family structure. And then one autumn evening, Ethan gathered everyone together. He had something to show them. He led them to the hill where he and Kate had been married. There, driven deep into the ground, stood a wooden post. And on that post hung the sign he had carved months ago. But beneath it, he had added a new line. "Always room for one more. This is who we are." Ethan set his arm around Kate. The children gathered close. "We don't turn away those who need help. We don't leave anyone behind. And there is always room for one more." Sophie, now 9 and growing taller each day, looked up at him. "Even if we don't have enough, especially then, because that's when it matters most." As they stood there watching the sun set over the desert, they had claimed Ethan thought of Rachel, his little sister, who he could not save. And he realized something profound. He had not failed her. He had honored her. Every child he saved, every orphan he took, and every life he protected was a tribute to the girl who had taught him what love meant. The grief would never fully leave, but it no longer consumed him. It had transformed into something else. Purpose, legacy, hope. Marshall Brooks visited one last time before winter set in. He brought news. Victor Crane had been found 2 weeks after the battle, dead from infection, in a cave 30 miles south. His operation had been dismantled. Dozens of children rescued from the mines. Women returned to their families. "It's over," Brooks said. "You're safe now." Ethan stood on the porch of his cabin, looking out at the land he had claimed, the family he had built. "We were always safe, because we had each other." Brooks smiled. "You've done something remarkable here, Cole. Not many men could have pulled this off. I didn't do it alone." "No," Brooks agreed, looking at Kate and the 7 children and playing in the yard. "You didn't, and that's what made it possible." Before he left, Brooks handed Ethan one final document. "What's this official recognition from the territorial governor? Your homestead is being designated as a way station for travelers. Government will provide supplies and support. In exchange, you agree to offer shelter to those in need." Ethan read the document carefully. "So we'd be helping people officially. That's the idea. Figured you were going to do it anyway. Might as well make it legal." Kate appeared beside Ethan and took his hand. "We accept." Brooks mounted his horse. "One more thing. There's talk of building a town here in a few years. If that happens, they'll need a name. Given what you've built, I suspect they'll call it Morrison Cole. Or maybe just Refuge. Either way sounds like home, Ethan said. Brooks tipped his hat and rode away, leaving the family standing together in the fading light. That night, after the children were asleep, Ethan sat on the porch with Kate. They could hear the desert wind whispering through the canyon, carrying the promise of winter and the hope of spring. "Do you ever regret it?" Kate asked. "Taking us in, all of us." Ethan looked at her in genuine surprise. "Not for a second. Why? Because we're not what you were looking for when you found us." Ethan took her hand and held it tight. "I wasn't looking for anything. I was just trying to outrun my ghosts. But you and these children, you taught me something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That the only way to outrun ghosts is to build something worth living for." And that's exactly what we've done. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching stars appear overhead. Inside the cabin, 7 children slept safe and warm. Outside, a man and woman who had found each other through tragedy kept watch over the family they had chosen. And in the distance, the desert stretched endless and unforgiving. But here on this small plateau with its wooden cabin and hand-carved sign, they had created something that would endure. A home, a family, a refuge for the lost and broken. Always room for one more. 23 years is a long time in the desert. Long enough for children to grow into adults. Long enough for a single cabin to become a cluster of buildings. Long enough for a homestead to transform into something no one could have imagined that scorching July day in 1883. But time moves slowly when measured in seasons of planting and harvest, in births and in deaths, in the steady accumulation of choices made one day at a time. Spring of 1884 brought the first real test. A late freeze killed half of Kate's garden. The well ran dry for 3 weeks. Ethan injured his remaining hand badly while working on a new barn infection, setting in so deep that for 5 days Kate genuinely believed she might lose him. Sophie, 9 years old by then, took charge of the household with a competence that startled even Kate. She rationed food, organized the younger children, kept everyone moving forward, while Kate sat vigil beside Ethan's bedside. The girl who had once asked if they were leftovers had become the spine that held them together. When Ethan finally recovered, weak but alive, he looked at Sophie with new eyes. "You saved us." Sophie shook her head. "We saved each other. That's what families do." Summer brought travelers, more than Ethan had expected. Word had spread somehow through the vast network of wagon trains and frontier posts. There was a place in Arizona where a one-armed man and his family would not turn anyone away, where food and water were shared freely, where children without parents could find home. They came in ones and twos at first. A widow with 3 children fleeing an abusive second husband, an elderly couple who had lost everything to bandits, a young man dying of consumption who wanted to see mountains one last time before the end claimed him. Ethan and Kate took them all in, fed them, sheltered them, sent them on their way with supplies and blessings. But then came the Johnsons. They arrived in late August, a family of 6 in a wagon so broken it seemed held together by hope alone. The father, William Johnson, had both legs crushed in a mining accident back in Nevada. He could not walk, could barely sit upright. His wife, Mary, was hollow-eyed with exhaustion, trying to care for 4 children under 8 while keeping her husband alive. "We're heading to California," William said, his voice apologetic. "Just need to rest a day or 2 if you can spare it." Ethan looked at the man's ruined legs, at the wife, who had not slept properly in months, at the children who were too quiet, too thin. "Stay as long as you need." 2 days became a week became 2. William's legs were not healing properly. Kate, who had learned considerable medical knowledge from Doc Peterson over the past year, examined him and delivered the verdict gently. "You can't travel. Not like this. You need months of rest and proper care. Maybe longer. But we have nothing." Mary Johnson's voice cracked. "We're already taking charity we can never repay." Kate glanced at Ethan. He gave the slightest nod. "Then don't think of it as charity. Think of it as neighbors helping neighbors." "We're not your neighbors," William said bitterly. "We're strangers you'll never see again once we leave." Sophie, overhearing the conversation, walked over to William's wagon. She looked the broken man directly in the eye. "My parents were murdered by raiders. I had nothing. This man took me in anyway." Her gesture included Ethan. "So if you think you're too proud to accept help, think about what your pride cost your children." The words were harsh, but delivered without malice. Simply truth spoken by someone who had lived it. William Johnson started to cry. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears rolling down weathered cheeks. The Johnsons stayed. William's legs healed slowly over 6 months. By the time he could walk again with crutches, they had built a small house 50 yards from Ethan's cabin. William proved to be a skilled carpenter, despite his limitations. Mary had a gift for weaving and sewing. Their 4 children blended seamlessly with Ethan's 7. The homestead was becoming something larger than one family. By 1886, 12 families lived on the land Ethan had claimed. The territorial government, recognizing what was happening, had expanded his homestead claim to cover nearly 600 acres. What had been Morrison Cole Homestead was now being called Refuge in correspondence from Fort Yuma. The name stuck. Ethan built a community hall that doubled as a schoolhouse. Kate organized lessons for all the children, teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, and history. Sophie, now 11, helped with the younger students. Lucas, 9, had discovered a talent for drawing and began creating maps of the surrounding territory. Iris, 6, sang like an angel and led hymns on Sunday mornings. Emma and baby Daniel, Kate's biological children with Michael, grew up knowing Ethan as Papa and the orphans as siblings. Baby Hope, the child born in a storm who should not have survived, was 3 years old and already showing signs of his mother's fierce determination. Benjamin and Anna, the second set of orphans they had taken in, were 9 and 7, inseparable from the other children. When asked who their parents were, they pointed to Kate and Ethan without hesitation. But peace never lasts forever in hard country. Winter of 1887 brought a different kind of threat. A man named Garrett Flynn rode into Refuge on a gray horse dressed in expensive clothes that marked him as someone from back east. He carried official-looking documents and a surveyor's equipment. He introduced himself as a representative of the Arizona Land Development Company. His smile was professional, his manner polite, but his eyes were cold calculation. "I'm here to inform you that this land has been purchased by my company. We're developing the territory for agricultural expansion. You and your people have 60 days to vacate." Ethan looked at the man for a long moment. Then he pulled out his own documents, the ones Marshall Brooks had helped him file years ago. "This is federal homestead land, claimed legally under the Homestead Act of 1862. It can't be sold without my consent." Flynn's smile never wavered. "There appears to be a clerical error in the filing. Your claim overlaps with prior Spanish land grants dating back to 1821. Those grants take precedence under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. My company purchased those grants from the descendants of the original holders." "That's a lie." The words came from Sophie, now 12 and standing in the doorway of the community hall. She held a thick ledger book. "I've been keeping records of every legal filing for this homestead since we established it. There are no Spanish land grants on this territory. The land office in Tucson confirmed it in writing." She walked over and handed the ledger to Ethan. He opened it to find meticulous documentation, copies of every claim, every permit, every official correspondence, dated, organized, cross-referenced. Flynn's expression darkened. "A child's scribbles don't constitute legal authority." Sophie met his gaze without flinching. "Neither does fraud, which is what you're attempting." The tension stretched thin. Flynn clearly had not expected organized resistance from what he had assumed was a ragtag collection of farmers. He shifted tactics. "Listen," his voice became conciliatory. "I understand you've built something here. The company is prepared to offer compensation. $500 for you to relocate peacefully. That's generous considering the circumstances." Ethan's voice was quiet but carried an edge like honed steel. "We're not leaving. Be reasonable, Mr. Cole. You're one man with one arm. I represent a company with considerable resources and political connections. If this goes to court, you'll lose everything, including the money I'm offering now." Before Ethan could respond, William Johnson approached on his crutches. Behind him came the heads of the other 11 families. They formed a line, shoulder to shoulder. "He's not one man," William said. "He's 12 families, 73 people. And we're not leaving either." Flynn looked at the assembled group, at the determined faces, at the children watching from windows. He seemed to be calculating odds. Finally, he mounted his gray horse. "You're making a mistake. My company doesn't give up easily. We'll be back with legal authority." "Then we'll be waiting," Ethan said. Flynn rode away, dust rising behind him. Kate came to stand beside Ethan, her hand finding his. "Can they really take this from us?" Ethan watched the rider disappear into the distance. I don't know, but we're going to fight like hell to stop them. The next 3 months were a blur of legal action. Flynn's company filed claims in territorial court. Ethan and the community hired a lawyer from Tucson, a sharp woman named Elizabeth Grant, who specialized in land disputes. She tore apart the company's case, systematically exposing falsified documents and fabricated land grants. But the company had money and connections. The case dragged through the courts, burning through the community's collective savings. Several families began to talk about leaving, about cutting losses before they lost everything. It was Sophie who organized the resistance. She called a meeting in the community hall and stood before adults 3 times her age. 3 years ago, I thought I was a leftover. Someone nobody wanted. This place taught me different. Her voice was steady, commanding attention despite her youth. Mr. Ethan could have walked past my mama Kate when she was dying in the desert. He could have said it wasn't his problem. But he didn't. He stopped. He helped. He chose to care when it would have been easier not to. She looked around the room at faces marked by hardship and hope. That's what this place is. It's every time someone chooses the hard thing because it's the right thing. It's every person we took in. Every meal we shared when we didn't have enough. Every time we said, there's always room for one more. Her eyes found Ethan. You taught us that family isn't about blood. It's about who you stand with when everything falls apart. Well, things are falling apart now, and I'm standing with you. All of you. Who's with me? Silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then William Johnson stood balancing on his crutches. I'm with you. One by one, every adult in the room stood. Mary Johnson, the Martinez family, the Chengs who had arrived last spring, the widow Peterson with her 3 daughters. All of them were with you. The case reached territorial Supreme Court in June 1888. Elizabeth Grant presented a case built on meticulous documentation backed by testimony from Marshall Brooks and Doc Peterson, supported by affidavits from dozens of travelers who had been helped by the refuge community. The Arizona Land Development Company presented falsified documents and paid witnesses. The court ruled in favor of Ethan Cole and the refuge community. The company's claims were dismissed. Their representatives were fined for fraud and barred from operating in Arizona territory. When the news reached refuge, the celebration lasted 3 days. But Ethan stood apart from the revelry, looking out at the land they had saved. Kate found him on the hill where they had been married. You should be celebrating. I keep thinking about how close we came to losing it all. One judge who believed their lies. One witness they managed to turn. And 73 people would have been cast out with nothing. But that didn't happen this time. Ethan turned to face her. But it'll happen again. Different threat, different enemy. This land, what we've built, it's always going to be under threat from people who want to take it. How do we protect it forever? Todd considered the question. Maybe we can't. Maybe the best we can do is teach our children to fight for it the way we did. To choose the hard thing because it's the right thing, and trust they'll pass that on. Ethan pulled her close. When did you become so wise? Around the time I decided to pull a wagon through the desert with 5 children. I had no business trying to save. He laughed, surprising himself. That was pretty foolish. It was the smartest thing I ever did. Years passed, the children grew. Sophie became a teacher, eventually taking over the school entirely from Kate. Lucas's maps proved so valuable that the territorial government commissioned him to survey the entire region. Iris married at 18 to a young rancher from the neighboring valley, their wedding the largest celebration Refuge had ever seen. Emma, Kate's oldest biological child, became a doctor. She studied under Doc Peterson, then traveled east to a women's medical college in Pennsylvania, returning 3 years later with a degree and a determination to provide proper health care to the frontier. Daniel, Kate's son with Michael, showed his father's courage. He became a deputy marshal working to stop the kind of violence that had orphaned so many of the children who now called Refuge home. Hope, the child born in a storm, grew into a man who lived up to his name. He had a gift for bringing people together, for resolving conflicts before they escalated. By his 21st birthday, he was effectively leading Refugees Community Council. Benjamin and Anna, the orphans from the second family, found their callings too. Benjamin became a blacksmith, his forge the beating heart of Refuge's growing economy. Anna opened a general store that served as the community's trading post and gossip center. By 1895, Refuge was no longer just a homestead. It was a town, Population 217. With a school, a church, a general store, a blacksmith, a doctor's office, and a marshal's station. The Arizona Territorial Legislature officially incorporated it, granting them the right to elect their own government. Ethan Cole was elected mayor in a unanimous vote. He tried to refuse, saying he was too old at 54, too broken, not educated enough. Sophie, now 20, and fierce as ever, shut down that argument immediately. You're exactly educated enough. You learned that family is built by choice, that there's always room for one more, that you don't abandon people when things get hard. That's the only education that matters. So Ethan served, not because he wanted power, but because his family asked him to. And by then, Refuge was his family, all 217 people. But time catches everyone eventually. Kate fell ill in the winter of 1898. Pneumonia, Emma diagnosed. Bad but treatable with rest and care. Kate laughed it off, insisted she had work to do, kept pushing herself. Until one morning she did not wake up. Emma found her mother still and peaceful, her hands still resting on the quilt she had been mending the night before. Hope, now 15, had fallen asleep in a chair beside her bed. In death, Kate Morrison Cole looked young again, the lines of hardship smoothed away. Ethan took her hand and held it for 3 hours before anyone could convince him to let go. The funeral was held on the hill where they had been married. Every person in Refuge attended. Marshall Brooks, now retired but still visiting annually, delivered the eulogy. Catherine Morrison Cole taught us something fundamental, that love is not a limited resource, that when you give it away, you don't have less, you have more. She opened her arms to children who were not hers, and in doing so, she became mother to hundreds. Ethan stood at the grave long after everyone else had left. Sophie approached carefully now, a woman of 24 with children of her own. Papa. It was what she still called him, what all his adopted children called him. You should come inside. I keep thinking about the day I found her. Ethan's voice was rough with grief. She was dying, pulling that wagon through the desert with 5 children. Any rational person would have said she was beyond help, that trying to save her would just mean dying together. But you tried anyway. I couldn't walk past. And now she's gone, and I don't know how to walk forward. Sophie took his hand the same way she had as an 8-year-old child who had just lost her parents. You walk forward the same way you always have, one step at a time, choosing to care even when it hurts, choosing family even when it costs everything. She gestured back at the town spread below them. Look what you built, Papa. Look what Mama Kate built with you. That doesn't die just because she's gone. It lives in every person you helped, every child you took in, every family you saved. That's her legacy. That's your legacy. Ethan looked down at Refuge, at the houses and buildings that had not existed 15 years ago, at the children playing in streets that had been empty desert, at the smoke rising from chimneys, each one marking a family that had found home here. She would have wanted me to keep going. Sophie squeezed his hand. She would have expected nothing less. Ethan served as mayor for 7 more years. He saw electricity come to Refuge in 1902, powered by a generator Lucas designed. He saw the town's first telephone line installed in 1903. He watched Arizona move closer to statehood with each passing year. But mostly he watched the children grow and have children of their own. Watched families build on the foundation he and Kate had laid. Watched Refuge transform from a place of survival into a place of thriving. In the spring of 1906, Ethan Cole sat in a rocking chair on the porch of the original cabin. Now surrounded by newer, larger buildings, it had been preserved as a historical landmark. The sign above the door, hand-carved 23 years ago, still hung there. Morrison Cole Homestead. We leave no one behind. Always room for one more. A boy of 12 approached the porch. Thomas Morrison, Emma's son, and Ethan's great-grandson. The child's name honored Michael Morrison, the man who had died protecting his family so many years ago. Great-grandpa Ethan, can I ask you something? Ethan gestured to the chair beside him. The boy climbed up. Tell me again how you met great-grandma Kate. Ethan smiled. He had told this story 100 times. He would tell it 100 more if asked. Well, it was summer of 1883. I was riding through the Arizona desert, not looking for anything in particular, just trying to outrun my ghosts. What ghosts? Ethan pulled out a photograph he always carried, faded and worn, showing a 9-year-old girl with blonde hair and a gap-toothed smile. Her name was Rachel. She was my little sister. And she died when I was young because I couldn't save her. Thomas studied the photograph solemnly. Is that why you saved all those kids to make up for her at first, maybe? Ethan returned the photo to his pocket, but I learned something. You can't trade lives like currency. Can't balance a ledger with souls. Rachel's death doesn't matter less because I saved others. And the children I helped don't matter less because they weren't my blood. Then why did you do it? Because Ethan looked out at the town spread before them. When you see someone who needs help, you have a choice. Walk past or stop. Every choice shapes who you are. And I decided I wanted to be the kind of man who stops, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, that's when it matters most. Thomas was quiet for a moment processing. Then he asked the question that mattered. Great-grandpa, how will I know what I'm supposed to do with my life? Ethan turned to look at his great-grandson. At this boy who carried Michael Morrison's name, Kate's eyes and a future not yet written. You'll know because you'll see someone who needs help and you won't be able to walk away. And that moment of choosing to stay, to help, to fight, that's when your purpose begins. Sophie appeared in the doorway, her own children and grandchildren visible behind her. The house was full of family, 3 generations gathered for Sunday dinner. The tradition Kate had started 15 years ago, and that continued even after her death. Papa, dinner's ready. Ethan stood slowly. 65 years old, his remaining hand gnarled with arthritis, his body marked by a lifetime of hard labor. But his gray eyes were still sharp, still watchful. Come on, boy. Let's go eat. Thomas hopped down from the chair. Before following, he paused and looked back at the sign above the door. Did you really never turn anyone away? Not once, and you know what? We survived anyway. Thrived even. How Ethan placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. Because when you build something on the foundation of caring for each other, there's no limit to what you can survive. They walked inside together. The cabin that had once sheltered 7 orphans and a broken man now echoed with the laughter of dozens of descendants. The smell of cooking food filled the air. Children played while adults talked. 3 generations of a family that had been built from choice, not blood. After dinner, Ethan returned to the porch. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Sophie joined him, as she often did. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Sophie spoke. Marshall Brooks wrote, "He's dying, wants to visit one more time before the end. Tell him he's welcome. Always has been." There's something else, Sophie hesitated. The territorial government wants to build a monument to you and Mama Kate, recognition for building refuge. Ethan shook his head. We don't need monuments. I told them you'd say that, so they're proposing something different. A foundation to help travelers in need, to provide resources for orphans. They want to call it the Morrison Cole Foundation. That, Ethan considered, that I could support. Sophie pulled out a letter. They want you to write something, guidelines for how the foundation should operate. Your principles in your own words. I'm not good with words. Papa. Sophie's voice was gentle but firm. You've been teaching us with words for 23 years. Write what you know. That night by lamplight, Ethan Cole wrote. His handwriting was rough, unschooled, marked by the tremor of age. But the words were clear. To whoever reads this, I'm nobody special. Just a broken man who was given a second chance. These are the things I learned. Not from books or fancy schooling, but from living and failing and trying again. First family is not about blood. It's about who you choose to stand with when everything falls apart. Second, there is always room for one more. Always. The moment you start calculating who deserves help and who doesn't, you've lost something essential. Third, you can't save everyone. I learned that when my sister died. But you can save someone, and that someone is worth everything. Fourth, the hard choice is usually the right choice. Walking past someone in need is easy. Stopping to help is hard. Do the hard thing. Fifth, you will fail. You will make mistakes. You will hurt people you love. That's being human. What matters is what you do after you fail. Do you give up or do you keep trying? Sixth, legacy is not about monuments or having your name remembered. It's about the lives you touch and what they do with what you gave them. I was given a choice in the desert 23 years ago. I could have ridden past a dying woman and 5 children. It would have been reasonable, practical even. but I stopped. And that choice changed everything. Not because I'm special, but because every choice matters. Every person matters. Every life saved creates ripples that spread farther than you can imagine. If you're reading this, you have the same choice I had. Will you walk past or will you stop? Will you protect only your own or will you say there's room for one more? Choose wisely. But more importantly, choose. The world needs people who care more than it needs people who are careful. Ethan Cole, mayor of Refuge, Arizona Territory, May 1906. He sealed the letter and gave it to Sophie the next morning. She read it with tears in her eyes. This is perfect, Papa. It's just the truth. The truth usually is. Marshall Brooks arrived in late June, his health failing, but his spirit intact. He and Ethan sat on the porch for hours, two old men who had survived the hard years and lived to see something better emerge. You did it, Cole, Brooks said. Built something that'll outlast both of us. We did it, Ethan corrected. Couldn't have done it without you that day. Without Doc Peterson. Without every person who chose to stay and build instead of running. Still, Brooks coughed, his lungs failing. You were the one who started it. One man with one arm who refused to walk past people in need. One man who was trying to outrun his ghosts. Did you outrun them? Ethan thought of Rachel, of the photograph he still carried, of the grief that had never fully left but had transformed into something else over the years. No, but I learned to walk with them, and sometimes that's enough. Brooks died 3 weeks later in the guest room of the original cabin. Emma was with him providing morphine for the pain. His last words were about Kate. Tell her I said hello when you see her. Ethan held the old marshal's hand as he passed, another piece of the beginning slipping away. Another reminder that time spared no one. But life continued. It always did. Births and deaths, arrivals and departures, the constant flow of people through Refuge's streets. Some stayed, some moved on, all left changed by what they found there. By 1908, Refuge had grown to 400 people. Arizona was granted statehood in 1900, and Refuge sent Hope Morrison Cole as one of its representatives to the state legislature. The town became a symbol of something larger. A place where the hard values of the frontier had transformed into a community that cared for its own. Ethan lived to see it all. He lived to see his great-grandchildren marry and have children of their own. Lived to see Refuge connected to the wider world by telephone and telegraph and eventually automobiles. Lived to see the values he and Kate had planted take root and spread. He died on a Tuesday morning in January 1915, sitting in his rocking chair on the porch of the original cabin. He was 73 years old. Sophie found him, his face peaceful, his hand resting on the photograph of Rachel that he had carried for 44 years. The funeral was the largest Refuge had ever seen. People came from across Arizona. Former travelers who had been helped decades ago. Children who had been taken in and had built lives elsewhere. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren who knew him only through stories but understood his legacy. Hope Morrison Cole, now 32, and a state representative, delivered the eulogy. My father, because that's what he was to me, even though we shared no blood, taught us a simple lesson. When you see someone who needs help, you stop. You don't calculate the cost or measure the benefit. You stop because that's what decent people do. He paused, emotion thick in his voice. Ethan Cole was not a perfect man. He'd be the first to tell you that. He failed sometimes, made mistakes, carried grief that never fully healed. But he kept going, kept trying, kept believing that choosing to care mattered. Hope looked out at the crowd, at the hundreds of faces marked by Ethan's influence. This town exists because one broken man refused to walk past a dying woman and 5 children in the desert. Because he chose the hard thing. Because he built his life on a simple principle: there is always room for one more. That's his legacy, not the buildings or the land or even this town. His legacy is the choice we make every day. Do we walk past people in need or do we stop? The answer he gave, the answer this community has given for 32 years is clear. We stop. Always. They buried Ethan Cole on the hill beside Kate, the same place they had been married, the same place Kate had been laid to rest 17 years earlier. As the sun set over Refuge, painting the desert in impossible colors, 4 generations of the Morrison Cole family stood together. Sophie in her 30s now and still fierce. Lucas approaching 30 and still drawing. Iris, 26 and still singing. Emma and Daniel Kate's biological children had become pillars of the community. And behind them, their children and grandchildren, dozens of them, all carrying forward the legacy of two people who had chosen each other in the harshest place imaginable and built something that would endure. The sign above the original cabin still hung there, weathered by 3 decades of desert sun and storm. Morrison Cole Homestead, we leave no one behind. Always room for one more. It would hang there for another 100 years, a reminder of what two broken people had built when they chose to care more than it was safe to care, when they chose family over blood and purpose over despair. And in the fading light as the family descended the hill and returned to their homes, the desert wind whispered through the canyon, carrying stories of the past and promises for the future, carrying the legacy of a man who had been broken and had chosen to keep building anyway. Because that's what decent people do. They stop when someone needs help. They say there's always room for one more. They build something worth passing on. And they trust that the choices they make will ripple forward through generations, touching lives they'll never meet, creating futures they'll never see. That's legacy. That's what Ethan Cole and Kate Morrison built in the Arizona desert. And that's what endures long after the builders are gone.